The idea that some place in Illinois wants to kick out another place in Illinois should not be on the ballot. It shouldn't be something that's part of the lexicon and discussion of politicians. We're one state. We're supporting each other.
The only way that rural, small town, suburban, outstate Illinoisans will be able to return to a place where they had a voice in their state government is to create a new state.
That's Governor J.B. Pritzker from back in May and new Illinois Chairman G.H. Merrit about the issue of separating Cook County from the rest of the state. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, and find the podcast anywhere you get podcasts. Just search Illinois in Focus. Let's get into it because there are several referenda across the states asking voters in various counties if Illinois should split off from Cook County and Chicago, make a different state. A secessionist movement, some characterize it as. Others say it's a constitutional movement. I connected with G.H. Merrit. She's with the group New Illinois, which actually has a different track they're heading outside of these referenda that are being put on ballots across the state, with potentially up to a third of the state wanting to split off from Chicago. But G.H. Merrit talks about this movement and where New Illinois is coming from.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me on. Well, I know that in 7 counties, Illinois separation referendum is going to be having their referendum, which is pretty innocuous. It just talks about their county board entering into conversations with other county boards about separating. New Illinois isn't really involved in that. We're 2 separate organizations. We have the same end goal. We interact with each other, but this project of putting the referendum on countywide ballots, that is the basic focus of their organization. Our organization is more, we do a lot of different things. We're a 501c4 educational organization, and our mission is to educate Illinoisans about their right under the U.S. Constitution to pursue the formation of a new state. So we educate, we lobby, and we're also creating an organizational infrastructure for a new state. So
G.H. Merrit with New Illinois laying out the difference between New Illinois and Illinois separation, the difference between what she's focused with New Illinois and what separation group is looking to do with these non-binding referenda across the state. But there are 7 counties across Illinois that are asking voters a non-binding question about should they split off from the state. G.H. Merrit with New Illinois says one in particular is pretty interesting.
The one that people are really looking at is Madison County, because their referendum has been on the ballot in 26 counties so far. Each time it's won by a landslide. But I think that they've all been dark red counties. Now, we're a nonpartisan organization, but you'd have to be blind not to see that. But Madison County is a much larger county than some of them, and it's a more purple county, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes there.
So the process of creating new states, it's not going to be done through these referenda, though they will provide some kind of public polling of sorts that will give legislators an idea of which direction to go. But G.H. Merrit says creating a new state, it's spelled out in the U.S. Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, lays out the process by which new states can be created that are areas that are already part of a state. And what you have to do is get the consent of your state legislature and also the consent of Congress. So the part with Congress is probably the same as when a territory becomes a state. But what happens in the state legislature, it's a resolution, which means it's a simple majority vote and the governor doesn't sign it. So that's what we are working toward, is to educate people about the process, to educate people in the legislature about the process and our reasons why we're pursuing this path. And So there's about a dozen legislators that I know of now that support New Illinois.
And one of those is Brad Halbrook, state representative Republican from Shelbyville, and he's actually introduced such resolutions for like the past 2 or 3 or 4 general assemblies, and he actually had a hearing on it. Probably like a year and a half ago or so, where they held a hearing on his resolution, and to the surprise of, I'm sure, him and many others, they actually had a brief conversation about it. But why do people want to split off from Cook County and Chicago? People from downstate, so-called downstate, anything south of I-80, people consider downstate, even though I'm in the central Illinois area. And I think downstate's more like Cairo or the Metro East or Carbondale. So regardless, why do people want to split the state into 2?
Well, the key reason, Greg, is about representative government. Now, historically, the way things worked in the states, most, if not all of them, used what was called the little federal system, whereby, just like in the federal government, you had your state House of Representatives determined by population, and your state Senate was tied to the counties. And so it wasn't always one county, one senator. In Illinois, I think in the earlier, probably 1848 Constitution, they had, I think, 25 Senate districts, and so the counties were divided into that. But when you have it set up like that, you're not going to have any gerrymandering. But anyway, so what happened in the first part of the 20th century, you had a lot of, down in Alabama, you had a lot of migration from the rural areas to the cities. But Alabama failed to do any redistricting for 50 years. And so consequently, the people that lived in the cities were underrepresented. And so this went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in 1964, the Supreme Court had the Reynolds v. Sims ruling. It's considered one of the landmark cases of the 20th century. That's where we get that expression, one man, one vote. Earl Warren thought it was the most significant ruling of his tenure on the Supreme Court. But what they tried to do is to rectify a wrong in Alabama, and they took away any geographic basis for state legislatures. They, said, hey, we represent people. The legislatures represent people. They don't represent farms and trees and whatever. At that time, one of our U.S. senators was Everett Dirksen, and he warned that in any state with a sizable city, Reynolds v. Sims was going to cause all power in state government to be absorbed into that city. And that is what happened. And that's why Illinois isn't the only place with a movement like this. We have a state government that is completely dominated by Chicago and Cook County. And so even though people in the rest of the state get to vote, you have an area with 40% of the population completely dominating the other 60%. And so since it's unlikely that Reynolds v. Sims will ever be overturned, the only way that rural, small town, suburban, outstate Illinoisans will be able to return to a place where they had a voice in their state government is to create a new state.
So clearly this movement, I don't think is going to quiet down anytime soon. But back in May, Governor J.B. Pritzker was asked about the Madison County resolution that's on the November ballot, and he said that Illinois is one state.
Well, let me begin by saying just that we're a very diverse state, there's no doubt. We have rural communities and ex-urban communities and suburban communities, urban communities. And the idea that some place in Illinois wants to kick out another place in Illinois should not be on the ballot. It shouldn't be something that's part of the lexicon and discussion of politicians. We're one state. We're supporting each other. And as I was simply trying to point out, there are folks in Cook County who may not love the idea that they're sending $2 to an area of the state that only puts $1 into state coffers, but they do it anyway. And why? Because we're one Illinois. And the same thing, there are lots of people here in Madison County who support the idea of Cook County being part of Illinois. They understand that 102 counties, this is one of the greatest states in the country. I believe it's the greatest state in the country, and that it's our collective that makes us great. Having an agricultural economy, second to none, and having great industry up in Chicago that helps produce revenue that supports the rest of the state. All of that brings us together into a great state.
So some of the numbers that have been reported on by the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute indicate that, Chicago gives a lot of money to downstate, and while downstate may add to the state's pot of taxpayer money, a lot of people in downstate feel that they're sending too much money to Chicago, but some of the numbers that have been reviewed, more policy analysis, indicate that Chicago's sending a lot of money to downstate. But G.H. Merrit with New Illinois pushes back against that and says that data is being mischaracterized as hard data. Instead, it's policy analysis. But she talks about the spending differences between downstate and Chicago, and in particular how she says this could come to a head because of the financial dire straits of the state of Illinois, with $140 billion of unfunded pension liability and $40 to $50 billion of unfunded state retiree health care costs. And even some of the ratings houses have said that while it's $170 some odd billion of unfunded liability for the state of Illinois, according to the state, these ratings agencies say it could be upwards to $250, $300 million. Here is G.H. Merrit talking about the difference between downstate and Chicago spending at a state taxpayer level.
It uses bad numbers. The numbers for that came from the Legislative Research Unit, and they had warnings all over it saying don't draw conclusions from this incomplete information. And they gave lip service to that in the study and then proceeded to draw conclusions that were far beyond what the data could support. And also, people look at that as an economic study. It is not. It is a public policy analysis, a very biased one, I might add. And so we've done our own deep dive into the numbers. We have a finance committee with CPAs on it, but we also have help from financial experts from outside our organization. And we have been told that New Illinois, separated from Cook County, would have a GDP and population exceeding that of Indiana. And with a lower tax, lower regulatory environment, the economy would be able to flourish in a way that it can't right now.
So G.H. Merrit going on to talk about the importance that she sees in this movement for New Illinois. How long will it take? That's a great question. She foresees that there could be a financial cliff for the state of Illinois, and before that, the city of Chicago, which, by the way, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is going to be delivering his budget address, I believe. So we may hear about that this week. How are they going to plug, a financial cliff they're facing? But G.H. Merrit says that could come to a head, forcing this issue even more and saying that for the benefit of both parties, they could split the state into two to shore up the finances. So we'll see what happens with that. But clearly, some really fascinating things going on in the state of Illinois with people wanting to split the state. And what about Congress, right? What kind of movement's going to be happening in there? Obviously, something that's still uncertain, but you've heard the movement of trying to make Puerto Rico a state or Washington, D.C. a state. If there's something to make what could be a blue state a new state, well, then maybe there's a movement to balance that out with a new state being New Illinois, something, again, G.H. Merrit talked about. So appreciate her coming on and sharing some of her thoughts. Speaking of Puerto Rico, stay tuned. We'll talk about the national conversation around that, what was a joke during a Trump rally turning into political fodder. So stay tuned. We'll touch on that. Get this and more segments at America's Talking Network here on YouTube, and get this podcast anywhere you get podcasts at just search Illinois in Focus.